and for inviting me to host this. And to my home, Campus Si'im. It's my professional home, so thank you all. And we have so many questions for you tonight. So without further ado, I'm gonna start asking questions. Is that okay, John?
It sure is.
So as I told you, we have people here who have read your fantastic book, and some of them who haven't and should start reading as soon as this meeting is over. But as a first warm-up question, I really would like to hear that story about your first meeting with Mr. Pilates. That's an amazing one, and I think everyone can hear it over and over again.
Well, thank you. The story, I never really thought much about that in all the years. This is going back to 1963. And in all the years that I did Pilates and that I stayed involved and was very heavily involved at one point during the trial, I never thought about it until I actually had to write the book, or thought I had to write the book. And then when I thought about it, it was like the most graphic reminder of what it was like for me back, now it's almost 50 years away. And it's still very graphic in my mind. I started out, I went to Pilates, or what was then Joseph Pilates and his Contrology, because I had a chronic stiff neck, and I didn't actually know what to do about it. I'd had it all through college and law school. And a few years before I actually went in 63, my mother was just talking to me endlessly about this guy, Joseph Pilates, who she had started to go to, I think really just for exercise or whatever. She didn't really define it very well, but she was just smitten by him and how he exercised her body. My mother was not a dancer. She was not an athlete. She was a very dangerous person to be allowed to be a passenger in a car. You took your life in your hands with that. Even parking, you could get killed with my mother driving. But this got her, and she was bugging me all the time. She just talked about it endlessly. And she talked about it with all her friends, if she had people over for dinner. And I was having a lot of personal problems relating to her anyhow, and this just made it worse. So I kept, laughing about it, thinking it was one of my mother's, crazy things. And then she got my father to go, and he went and he started to talk about it enthusiastically. And I still didn't want to go and thought it was a whole bunch of nonsense. And so anyhow, finally, I gave in, and not to get my neck fixed, because I wasn't concerned. I gave in. I didn't want to hear about it anymore. So I decided I'm going to go. And one morning I take off. She calls him up and makes an appointment at like 7:30 in the morning. And I get up early and I get on the bus and I walk across New York and I go to this place, and I describe it in the book. It's a rundown. If anyone ever knew about 939 8th Avenue, I mean, it was a dump, really. It was a huge building, but it'd been there. It'd been there since probably 1880 or something like that, very run down. And going into the building, I kept saying to myself, yeah, this guy must be a complete phony. This is just nonsense. And I had this terrible attitude. Excuse me, bumped in my mic. When I went in, I go up the elevator. No, I went up the stairs. The elevator scared me. I went up the stairs and I come out of the stairs, and there is this shortish man, very stocky, wearing nothing but a black shorts and I don't even remember now. I remember, but he had a top on. He had a little canvas, what I thought were ballet kind of practice shoes. And that was it. It was a very chilly morning, very sunburned, veins, muscles, tendons sticking out all over him, wild white hair. And he was very dismissive, like, oh God, I've got to take care of one of my clients' kids' things. And he had no more interest in taking care of me than I had interest being there. I mean, this was like totally weird. We're the two antagonistic people, and I'm up there to get help on a stiff neck. And he sort of stuck out his hand, we shook hands. And meanwhile, he's taking my pulse while we're shaking hands, not letting my hand go, and kind of looking me over. Also, you could see right away that he had a fake eye. And his glasses, the hinges, there was tape on one of them. I mean, it was like, what? This is the guy my mother's talking about like this all the time? Anyhow, we get past the first 2 minutes. I try to tell him a little about my stiff neck. He doesn't pay any attention. There's no small talk. There's no, how are you? Good to meet you. I'm glad your parents, and yeah, nothing. So he points to the door. We go through the door. He asked me if I have shorts, and I said yes. A towel, I said yes, because my mother prepared me, nice Jewish mother. And so in we go, and I go into what he called the locker room, which was just no lockers in it, just a teeny little cubby hole with a shower curtain for a door. And he says, change. And I go in and change. And I come out, and when I walk in, of course, I mean, I don't know if anyone can remember their first reaction to seeing Pilates equipment, but you've seen pictures of it, you've been exposed to it. I never saw anything like it in my life when I walked in there, and I looked at this stuff all over, very crowded. There was hardly any space between the 4 or 5 reformers. There were pictures all over the wall of Joe, teeny little pictures. You see them now in archival stuff. No, it wasn't big, but it was a substantial bronze bust of him, picture of him in a Greek thing. What the hell am I doing here at 7:30 in the morning in New York when I had to go to my law office? And I couldn't believe I was still there, that I hadn't just walked out. But I went in, I changed, I came out, and he points to a reformer. He says, over there. And he says, sit down. So I sat down. I didn't do it the way he wanted. So he says, no, over here. This. Very few things. I had no idea what was going to happen next. I mean, who knew? I never saw anything like this. So anyhow, he finally, after 3 or 4 times, gets me sitting down in the right position. Then 3 or 4 more times, he gets me sitting back so that my head went between the shoulder rests, and then he gets my feet up on the foot bar. And I am, at this point, something had happened in my psyche somewhere. And I don't know whether it was him, me, or both, or whatever, but I completely gave in to him. Not because I wanted to or thought about it, but I gave in to him because there was no choice. I was on this thing. I was the kind of person that didn't start things that I couldn't finish, so I wasn't going to quit. So I somehow, without unconsciously, I must have said, all right, just do what the hell he asks you to do. Don't think about it. Just do it. And you'll be out of here and you'll go to your office and you can tell your mother you went to him and he's a complete crank and this is a whole bunch of nonsense, and just do it. So I did. I gave in to him and I just listened to him like a dog does to a dog trainer. I mean, that's all I can think of it as an analogy. I listened to him. He didn't tell you much. He told you one thing at a time very clearly. Feet on the foot bar, bend your knees, straighten your leg. That's all. And he didn't demonstrate, didn't point to a picture or anything, but he guided me through this whole thing. And I just kept going and I didn't think about anything other than doing exactly what he was telling me to do. And I kept doing it and I was starting to get pretty tired, but I was an athlete in another context. I thought I was a pretty good athlete till this happened. But anyhow, about 45 minutes later, all of a sudden he said, "You're done." And it was like, it's like when the dentist takes his drill out of your tooth and oh God, thank heavens. Well, that's how I felt. He says, change, shower, change. So I get up and I am so exhausted, I'm nauseous. I just couldn't. It took everything out of me just following him. And it wasn't like I was aerobically exhausted, like I'd run a marathon. I was just deeply, deeply tired. So I ran into the men's locker room, the little primitive shower in there, and I threw up. And also I had a towel, which my mother made me take, but it was a very small towel. I thought it was like to wipe your forehead. It was nowhere near enough to clean up the mess, get myself showered. It was just awful. And I had to go to work. And now it's, 8:30, 8:45, and I usually got to work pretty close to that. So there I was, still sweaty from the workout, even though I'd taken a shower. I had this terribly smelly towel. I was a mess in New York, and in those days in New York, you didn't walk around in athletic clothes. You walked around with shirt and tie and yada, yada. So anyhow, I walked past him at the front door. And he looked at me very carefully, which he did to everybody when they left. And he said, let's say this was a Tuesday, he said, Thursday, 7:00, $5. And I nodded my head, okay. And I get down on the street and I try to think, why did I agree to go back? This is just the worst thing that could happen to you in life, to start the day. I mean, you can't start the day in any worse configuration than getting up and doing this lunatic type exercises that you didn't know anything about, and then getting sick and having to go to work. But I said, oh, well, I can call them, a couple of days tomorrow, say no or not show up. Don't worry about it. And I didn't, but I kept thinking about it. It was like on my mind. It wasn't like I'm never going back there. It was, there was something there. And after a couple of days or a day, whatever it was, I said, what the hell? I'll give it one more try. And when I got through the second time and things felt so much differently, I continued to go. And there was a lot he did to convince me to do that, which I hadn't ever thought about till I wrote the book. I mean, there was something about him. There was something about his positive approach to teaching. There was a lot about the fact that it was a challenge, but it wasn't a competition. And I had spent my whole sort of upper middle class upbringing in competition. Everything was to study harder, get better grades, do better in sports, do this, get in a better school. And all of a sudden, I didn't much think about it, but I felt it. It was something about that appealed to me deep down, not in my conscious control. Wow. And I went back, and that was it. I was hooked. And, I never thought much about that experience until around the time of the lawsuit. And I was helping Ken from afar. I wasn't the principal lawyer by any means. I wasn't a lawyer on the case, but I had this history, and I'd called and met Ken before. And I was very upset about the idea that someone was trying to take his name and monetize it.
We will get to that lawsuit, because maybe some of our participants don't even know what lawsuit you're talking about. So can I just keep you there at the studio, because so many of our questions from home were actually concerning that routine, that automatic routine that you were describing as like automatic driving, as not even thinking about what you're doing. And people were asking, did everybody practice the same routine? Did you ever see someone practicing a different routine? Did Joe use names of exercises? Just a little bit about the studio.
Well, the routine was exactly the same for everybody. Exactly. You started with the same routine. There were 3 or 4 different routines for the equipment. So if you were on the reformer, which was everyone's goal in the studio to be there at a time when you could get on a reformer, you had a very specific routine. It was up on the wall in pictures, little bitty pictures of Joe. And it was exactly the same for everyone, with minor exceptions. The minor exceptions were, there were exercises added as you progressed. So, and there were adjustments to the springs. There were only 4 springs. They were all the same. It wasn't red, blue, green, yellow springs. They were all pretty rough. A lot of them were kind of corroded. they weren't stainless, sparkling springs like we have now, but there were 4 springs, and I don't think there was 2 positions to the foot bar, and I think 2 positions to the spring bar. It was a bar that you moved into 1 or 2 slots. So you didn't have a lot of choices. So some of the things that you did, there would be an adjustment of the springs as you went along, and it was usually to make them lighter, which always surprises people. Just think of the star. So if people are familiar with the star, that was sort of the last real show-off exercise. No one did it until they had been doing this for a couple of years. But if you do the star with all the springs, it's not very hard. You can't move the carriage, but you don't fall off. You can keep your balance. And as you take away the springs, it becomes really, really hard, till the point where either Joe or Bob Seed or someone will say, all right, do it once with no springs, in which case they really almost had to catch you, because it's so anyhow, those were adjustments that were made within this very fixed choreography. The second thing was he added things like the star, or someone added it, which would be try this, but only, I mean, by then you were doing the teaser like Benjamin. You look like Benjamin doing the teaser. It was perfect. And you could do all kinds of things. Your balance was great. So he would add an exercise that would, in fact, challenge that a bit. But everyone started out with the footwork, and you did the coordination and the 100 and the arms and the leg circles, and you went through that whole routine, exactly like everyone else. And when you got messed up at the beginning and you couldn't remember what to do, which was also a real challenge, but a very important thing, because you didn't have as much help as you do now, nowhere near it. So you looked at the person next to you, which you're not supposed to do, but you kept looking and trying to figure out, oh, what's next? Or you'd have to go up to the wall and look down through all these pictures. So that's how you know that everyone was doing the same thing.
So you mentioned all the names of exercises, and you actually, I'm not even sure that he would name them out loud in the studio. Like, would he name the exercise for you?
Oh yeah, it was very important. There was, we're now talking about a man who probably in today's world didn't graduate high school, but he had this incredible instinct about teaching you things, about how you could learn things. And names were extremely important, extremely important. And they still are today. When you are experienced and have done it for a while, and you go anywhere in the world, and you'll like on Reformer, and the instructor says, okay, do your footwork, and you know exactly what that is. Oh, okay, do the teaser, do the 100, do the thing, do rolling like a ball, do this, do that, do the horse, do the hug a tree. All of those names were there then, and they have stuck with it. There's a lot different names now, and there's more equipment and more adjustments, but the fact is the name is what stuck in your mind. And,
Yes.
you know, I wrote in the book about once when I was in a spa and I went and did it by myself, and someone couldn't believe I could do it, the whole thing by yourself. And you're not an instructor? How? You just learned it. You focused so hard on that you learned it, and you had no help. So, you know, you were thrown in the water and you had to swim, and you did. Everyone did. There was only 50 everyone's, I will tell you that, but everyone did it. And studio ran after he died. People came and kept doing it just like he was there. So.
I often hear Pilates teachers tell clients something like slowly or carefully, like do things slowly and carefully. Did Joseph Pilates ever say anything like that to you or to other clients?
Oh, yeah. Pace was vital, but speed was irrelevant. If you try to rush through something, and then, you know, there's certain exercises you can do very quickly, he'd slow you down with one or two exceptions. Knee stretches, that he wanted you to do quickly, and he would go like that, and you'd move fast. But other than those things, like the teaser, if you could do it unbelievably slowly, he never smiled or never said good job or wonderful, but you knew he really appreciated it. So you weren't doing the teaser. It was extremely slowly, but you couldn't stop for anything. You couldn't get water. You couldn't talk to anybody. You couldn't, you just couldn't stop. And that was the really most important thing, is keep that rhythm, that pace, that momentum from beginning to end. And so you did things quite slowly. Yeah.
So that relationship of yours that developed between you as a young man and him as an older man was very special, and maybe even weird and
peculiar. Yeah.
How did you experience all of that, and him passing away eventually? I mean, what might have been quite an experience for you. Can you?
Well, again, you know, when I was going through this, I had no judgment on it. That was one of the things I was there for. Everything else in my life was a judgment: who to be friends with, who to do this, how to do this case, not do this case, how to argue. Was judgment. Think about it. This was the opposite. This is what one of the things that, when I look back on it after all these years and after trying to write the book, this was one of the things that didn't have anything to do with that. It was just being there. So I didn't think about how weird it was. I knew at certain times, particularly when we went walking on 8th Avenue, that it was weird. I mean, it was totally nuts. I mean, people seeing us it wasn't like two guys hanging out, or here was this old guy. He was in his 80s, wearing half the time so underdressed you'd think he'd freeze to death on the spot, wearing usually a white turtleneck, long sleeved, and these little black shorts and these ballet-like shoes, walking down the street, and we weren't just walking together. He had his arm in my arm, and it was like a lever. I mean, he could pull me along. And here's this Brooks Brothers preppy guy with a bow tie. No, I didn't wear bow ties then. A tie and a beautiful suit and shiny leather shoes and, nice high collared shirt and all that. And I was in my 30s and he was in his 80s. And we're flying down 8th Avenue. I mean, everyone looked at us like this. What the hell is this? And so then I knew it was weird. But the other thing about that was I learned to accept it. It was fine. I wasn't bothering anybody. I didn't care how I looked, which was important for me because everything else, I cared about how I looked. That's all it was, image and all that. And here I am, this creepy situation on 8th Avenue that it's still pretty funky in New York, but nothing like it was then. And flying down the street, going right through traffic, crossing against a red light, just flying along. And it was educational in that sense that you could live this way. You didn't have to, obey all the rules 100% of the time. 45 mile per hour, you could drive 50, 55. You could cross against a red light if there were no cars coming. He could cross against a red light, even if the cars were coming. He made them stop. But the point is, I don't know what the point is, but the point is a relationship, looking at it, had to be very strange. And I wasn't thinking about anything. I didn't ask him where he learned how to do this or what it was like being. I don't even think I realized he'd been in a prisoner of war situation. I didn't care. I mean, it wasn't, and he wasn't about to talk about it anyhow.
Did you think that he was meeting with like other clients, or you knew that you were special? Like, why did he choose you? Did you ever think about it?
Not then, but I have since, sure. No, there were no other clients, including my parents, with whom he and Clara were somewhat more friendly, to the point where they might send him a birthday present or something like that. But no, he didn't know anyone's name. I mean, let's get that straight. He may have known it. He never used it for anyone but me. And why? I never thought much about it till I had to do the first lecture on it and that was 2007. I had to go back over this history. I never thought I did much. That was the other thing. I just kept, when it came time to keep it going or organize it, it wasn't like, oh, I got to keep this thing going and let's have a meeting and let's do this and it's important. It was, okay, well, what can we do? And it was very casual, unplanned, unthought about. And it happened very spontaneously. It wasn't like we thought, oh, we keep this going and in a few years it'll be huge and a big business and people. No, none of that. Well, we just wanted a gym to work out in. We wanted a place where this equipment was. We wanted a good instructor. That was all we wanted. So, and the fact that Clara had invited me up there and then I went, and it was miserably uncomfortable in the social culture that I was familiar with. People had to talk to one another and small talk and how's your business and what are you doing and da, 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 and have you been in Santa Fe and Paris and yeah, none of that. It was dead silence a hell of a lot of time, and I had to think, number one, what the relationship was about, why it came about, and I had to think, why did I do all this? I mean, I never got a penny from any of it or any recognition either until now. Uh, uh, the, the thought that I had and that sticks with me, and again, it's purely conjecture. There's no way to know. I think Joe had these instincts that people don't have, that it's a rare thing. And how he acquired it, where he acquired it, I couldn't imagine. I did think I figured out how he learned about contrology, but he was looking for something in his life to continue this, but he didn't know what he was looking for. And I came along, and, you know, as I said earlier, we both had this very antagonistic, hostile view of each other. I thought he was a quack and a lunatic and had, you know, seduced, not physically, but certainly emotionally, my mother and father. And he thought I was this, you know, silver spoon in the mouth, a rich kid, properly educated and all that, all things he wasn't. And, you know, this brat that he had to kind of teach contrology. Ugh. And he was old and didn't want to do it. But when that changed, everything changed. And then something must have happened with him that said, you know, this guy is going to help me. He's the first one that's come along that had the right degree of enthusiasm and he didn't want anything. I wasn't there to learn to teach, to open a studio, to take his work, or, you know, he's very paranoid about people stealing his work, but changing it. And I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't, you know, I wasn't Corolla, or he was furious at Corolla because she changed the horse, you know, the box had to be parallel or a little whatever. I wasn't going to do that. And somehow he saw in me something that he needed, not particularly a grandchild, but there was certainly that too, but it was something that he thought would help, and it was right. I mean, that's the other thing. I did it, and it took me years to figure out why, and I'm still not 100% sure. One of the reasons I did it is I didn't think not to do it. I thought, oh, sure, you want to have a meeting? Let's go here. Let's do this. Oh, okay, I'll find somebody. It was that kind of a thing. It wasn't like I had a job or a to-do list or how are we going to keep Pilates alive and da, da, da. And then when it finally sort of disappeared in the early 80s, or almost disappeared, I wasn't saying, oh my God, it's gone. No, it just wasn't around. And when it finally started to come back, and Joan Breitbart called me and said, would you call this guy Ken Edelman? What do I want to do that for? He said, we got to get some help. Call Ken. And then I got back. All of a sudden, I'm back in it again. And then after the case was over, I wasn't one of the original people to found PMA. No, I was gone again. And then someone said, we'd like you to be the keynote speaker at the Pilates convention. Then I had to go back over everything. I had to talk about it. I had never thought to do that. And that's what started it all over again. So there's not a lot of rational, clear answers to your question or my question. But I think the book sort of, I think, may guide the reader a little toward understanding of that. I just went along with it.
Sounds like he was some kind of a wizard, really. Like he was enchanting and you were enchanted. It sounds so magical, this whole thing, because you were actually not thinking it. Let me take you to that point after he was gone, and you had to make that heroic move and get Romana in the business. And I actually got a question from home asking, was she even in touch over the years with Joe and with the studio after she was a student of him when she was younger, right? And then
yes.
What happened throughout the years?
Well, that's probably a matter of a controversy. And what I believe occurred, I learned from Clara. And I do not believe Clara ever told a lie to me or anyone. So I take it as the truth, but there are certainly other people who have different views. And the only thing I say about those views, again, I don't know it firsthand. So I've got it secondhand, and so does everyone else. But the secondhand views came after Romana had started believing very seriously that she was, in fact, the successor to Joe, that's what he wanted, that's what he told her, that's what he trained her for. Now, I do know that I never, ever saw her in all the years I was at the studio, never saw her there, or Clara ever mentioning anything about her until I got desperate to find someone to run this new studio that we were putting together. And Clara said that she had been in touch with Clara. Romana had been in touch with her. She didn't work at Joe at the gym, and she was back in town. She was teaching ballet, and I knew that because my daughters were going to dance at the same place she taught, although they weren't in her class yet. They eventually were, but and she might be interested in this. And Joe thought she was a very good student, and she was a ballet teacher, and she was back from Peru where the marriage had fallen apart. She had 2 children. This would be maybe a good person. Clara didn't mention that she'd worked at Corolla's, but we know she did from other people. And so that's when I decided, I said, I was desperate. No one was going to do it. I mean, none of his assistants were going to do it. Kathy Grant was not going to do it. Mary Bowen was not going to do it. Carolla wasn't going to do it. So I was very, very concerned that we weren't going to find anybody and that it was going to be over. And be over meant to all of us, we wouldn't have a place to do contrology. Not that the world would lose Pilates. It was very personal, very selfish, which is fine. But so that's what I thought when I approached Romana. The second thing that I know is when she did come into the studio and start to teach, she did not know the routine we knew. She knew stuff from Carolla, and John Winter very patiently and very carefully helped her understand. And of course, she learned it in 4 seconds flat. I mean, she knew the body, and she was a very good ballet teacher, I'm told, and she absorbed it instantly. But she also absorbed this thing that I used to sell her, because I recognized her sort of prima donna nature right off the bat, because the way she treated me like a piece of dirt, because, you know, what the hell are you doing with Joe and Clara Pilates? You know, I wasn't teaching. So anyhow, when she absorbed that story of what she could be and do as a Pilates teacher, and that's the history that she's written about herself. So that's all I know. And she saved it. There's no question. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
the people that took offense at some of the way I characterized her in the book, particularly during the trial, they completely ignored the fact of how grateful we all have to be to what she did at the time and how hard she worked to get it to a point where it could still survive. So, very interesting person.
I'm sure. I want to take us back to, I don't know, Germany, the history chapter. I really loved that one. I mean, we all grew up on the tales of went to England and taught prisoners, and turns out he was a prisoner of war himself, apparently, a man who reinvented himself through contrology. Can you tell us about the quest, about like to discover the roots and the history? 2 wives, 2 children, who knew?
My quest to understand where it came from? Yeah, well, the interesting thing there, I think, was when it dawned on me that all of the information anybody in the world had didn't touch on the principal thing. Where the hell does this thing come from? How do you, it didn't just spring up in the man's head. I mean, there was so much work that went into developing a routine, understanding what the routines were supposed to do, kind of putting one thing with the next, how to make this whole thing work. He just didn't land on Ellis Island in 1927 and all of a sudden walk into Manhattan with this thing. But if you look at everything, including every interview he ever had, and I've looked at them, they're all up in Ken Endelman's office. There's nothing. It's not. So that was kind of a it was such an enormous gap in a coherent story of this, then I had to start to think about it. And, I could put a few things together. One is I could see him as a person and what he might want to be doing at any one time, because I just spent enough time with him. I also had quite a familiarity with prisoners, people, men actually, who were incarcerated, because I did pro bono a lot of prisoners' rights cases. And with prisoners' rights cases, you don't just meet they're all class actions. You don't just meet one or two prisoners in the visiting room. You go back into the prisons and you meet with 50 of them or 100 of them, and you got 4 armed guards behind you. Not that I ever felt I needed them. They really do respect lawyers who are trying to help them. But the one thing back there was you could see the exercise, what they did every day. They worked out. They were the most buff bunch of people. It was like walking into a American football gymnasium, a locker room, and seeing all these tremendously buff guys. And even then they're pulling weights while you're talking to. So those two things kind of clicked. Here he is in confined space. He's a very vain human being. He's a man who can't sit still. And what do you do when you have nothing else to do and you're Joe Pilates? You learn to exercise. And where do you exercise? Well, they didn't have big farms and yards and stuff. They were in their cells on straw mattresses. And that's where he learned it. That's, to me, it had to be that. So that's how I got to that. And of course, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't really matter. And the sadness that comes from that is that he was ashamed of it. He was embarrassed about it instead of proud of it. And that's always bothered me. I thought this guy lived his whole life hiding something that showed a part of him that so few people in the world would have any ability to do, to take care of himself. He told someone, Lolita told us, that maybe he told Corolla or something, that they were among the best years of his lives. Well, you tell me another prisoner who says that. I mean, so yeah, that was a very sad sort of thing about it. Yeah.
Any knowledge of, you did mention his niece working at the studio before your time, and then do you know anything about his children, anything at all?
No, I know nothing about them except they didn't exist for him. And I don't know about his niece. I know he did make at least one trip to St. Louis to see his brother, Fred. And Fred at one time also came to New Jersey. I know about that from Clara, actually. Came to New Jersey to help him fix or make some reformers, I think reformers. But there was no, that I know of, relationship or no recognition of his children that I know of. Now that, could be, Clara was a very, not particularly open, but very straightforward person. Joe was really tricky. He was very guarded about a lot of stuff. He could tell you one thing, and in a way, he taught that way. He tricked you into doing what he wanted. He knew he was doing that. It's not like it came very naturally to him. So even had I said to Joe on one of our walks, hey, listen, Joe, about 40 years from now, someone's going to ask me to write a book about you, and I don't know shit about you. Just tell me a little about what it was like on the Isle of Man, or what happened to your kids? You had all these kids over in Germany. You kind of walked away. What happened to them? Yeah, it wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have told me the truth if he wasn't proud of it. And unfortunately, he wasn't proud of a lot of the things that, I think, and most people would think, you should be really proud of yourself for overcoming that or doing this, or, even all the fakery he had to do to get into this country. And gee, Joe, you've got street smarts, man, like nobody else on earth. And no, he was ashamed of it all, sadly. And anybody who knew him would think, Joe, ashamed of anything? He's a cock of the walk. I mean, you couldn't tell it. So it would have been very hard to have gotten a straight story, even had I had the curiosity to ask. I didn't care.
Amazing. You mentioned him building reform. Did he actually build equipment during those years? Where was they built? And who built them before Kenny started making them in Sacramento? What happened with building equipment over the years before Kenny started doing it?
Well, if you look, even Kenny has some of these old equipment.
Yeah, I know.
The foot bar is your common, ordinary pipe. You can go to the hardware store on the corner. You can get 3 pieces of pipe cut to the right length. You can get 2 elbow turns. You can get a machine that would thread it. You thread it, you put it together. That's his foot. He did it. And the bed was a piece of rectangular furniture. He or Fred or Mr. DeSeo or someone else in New Jersey did it. They built it. And the rails were angle iron. They were cold rolled steel at the time, but now they're either stainless or aluminum. And the wheels were wheels that are on the bottoms of dollies. They were commercial wheels. They were only one direction. There wasn't this. Now they're rollerblade wheels. They're ball bearings and this and that, and they're beautiful things. Straps were belting leather, belt that you used to in the Colt firearms factory to run all of the machines at everyone's desk. The upholstery stapled on the bottom or nailed in, hammered in. Extremely basic, primitive stuff that you could go down to the local hardware store and get. And the springs, I described them before. They were just commercial moldy zinc-coated springs. They weren't the beautiful stainless steel springs with yellow and red and this. It was extremely primitive, but it worked perfectly because it was super simple. And that was it. In fact, it worked in ways that some of the equipment today doesn't. And I'll give you one example if you got a minute. all reformers, whoever makes them, have wheels that go vertically on the track, and they have wheels that go horizontally against the outside thing. So the carriage moves back so smoothly, so smoothly. Don't hear it. It's easy, moves back. His carriage had these 4 commercial, I don't know what you call these wheels, but they were just standard wheels you buy in hardware store. You see them in the windows a lot. And they were screwed into a piece of wood on which there was some upholstery. So when they moved back and forth and they were absolutely straight, it was quite quiet and extremely smooth. In fact, there was a little bit less drag in a way than the ones now. The thing just floated. But if they were off 1/8 of an inch sideways, the carriage or the platform would jam or rub up against the side, and it would make a noise, and it would be very hard to move, and you could actually get sort of stuck. That was on purpose, because the minute that carriage went off one side or another, Clara or Joe would be over there in a flash, because you had done what they wanted you to do, which is act unsymmetrically. You were out of balance. You pushed harder with one side than the other. Or if you're doing leg circles, your circles weren't equal. And Joe was absolutely nuts about this symmetry of motion, that everything had to work together in your body symmetrically. If you exerted more force on your right side, you were going to hurt somewhere, something was going to get hurt. And in ballet, that's how he fixed all the ballet dancers. He got them back into symmetry. So the reformer sent a signal throughout the whole studio. Hey, John over there is now pushing unsymmetrically or doing something wrong. And that was, extremely important. Clara couldn't see very well at all. She heard that squeak. So, and then they saw what was wrong, and they helped you overcome it, so that you'd move that carriage perfectly. So yeah, he made all this stuff, or he or somebody in New Jersey, or some friend of his down at the Masons from Germany. Yeah, they made it all themselves. It was all primitive.
Dave from Balanced Body, hi Dave, says
Where's
that
Dave?
he's here. He's saying that the original carriage wheels that Joseph Pilates used are called industrial casters, and Balanced Body casters, and Balanced Body sourced and uses the same wheels on the Contrology reformers. Thank you, Dave.
Right.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and they use a belting leather straps too.
Yes.
Which also, by the way, has a different effect than the climbing ropes, because it too will move sideways on the pulley and jam or make a noise or do something that indicates it's not going absolutely symmetrically.
So Pilates actually made like a teacher's assistant. The reformer was the teacher's assistant.
Well, that's right. There was only one teacher. There were assistants of some that walked and others that were built into the equipment.
So do you think that, I mean, some of his like next generation, like Ron Fletcher and John Breitbart, they did not call their work Contrology, or of course not Pilates. Why do you think they chose to call their work differently. I mean, there wasn't, I mean, Gallagher was not in the picture back then, right? I mean, when Joan started her business, can you?
That's absolutely true. I can speak to Fletcher. I know Joan, but I don't know why she gave it a different name. I think she just wanted a distinctive name, but Fletcher had an enormous ego, and I credit him a great deal with the survival of Pilates, and I admired him greatly the way he taught. But you can't ignore his ego, and he when he wrote the book with all the stars in it and the pictures of star, beautiful body or something, he called it a sort of a Fletchery thing to do. Joe and Clara aren't mentioned in the book. They're not there. And I was really upset about that, because I happen to know that Clara talked him into opening that studio in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills, and he owed everything to them. I mean, including his own rehabilitation by Joe. He didn't get along with Joe, and really Clara had to take over, and that I know both from him and from Clara. I don't know it from Joe. So he wanted to put his own mark on it. He wanted to make it his. And I think it was very important that Ken, who he used to make equipment, he bought all his equipment from Ken. When the lawsuit came along, Ron didn't want any part of it. I mean, who wants any part of any lawsuit? No one. But he particularly didn't. And Ken is very persuasive in his own way and very dogged. He sticks with things till he gets it the way it should be. And anyone who uses his equipment knows that. So he convinced Ron to come back in the fold. And Ron was very important as a witness. He was extremely, once he came back, he was very supportive of Ken and very, very important to the whole project. And a lot of what he told the judge stuck with her. I mean, what I told stuck with her too, but that was, you know, from a very different perspective than his. And, you know, and his not using the name and avoiding the name would have not helped the lawsuit. But he changed.
I really encourage everybody to read that chapter in the book, because I think that whole lawsuit was such an ordeal, and it's amazing that you even came back from wherever you were to support that process of you know, just maintaining the name and maintaining Pilates as a public thing. Once again, it was your, I don't know how many times that you saved our industry all by yourself.
Well, it you know, it in hindsight, yeah, oh, he was there, he was Zelig in that picture, he was there. But fact is, you know, it didn't seem like much until the lawsuit came along. And then there were two things going on. Number one, Ken's determination to get this thing done right. I mean, his leadership ability is astounding. So he wanted to help.
Tell people who maybe don't even know what the lawsuit was about, just like a 2-sentence introduction.
Well, I don't have 2 sentences in me. I'm short on periods, but I'll do the best I can. The lawsuit was a crucial test of whether a man named Sean Gallagher, who was in cahoots with Romana at the time, could purchase a trademark of Pilates and force everyone who wanted to use that name in connection with their business, which was everyone, to pay him a royalty or be subject to a lawsuit. And he had threatened people with a very harsh cease or desist letters from a significant New York law firm, and had pushed it very hard. He filed a couple of lawsuits against individual studio owners who were claiming they were teaching Pilates. Well, they were teaching Pilates because they'd been doing it for 20 years. And he finally tangled with Ken, who was building at that time almost all the Pilates equipment. And that was a vital piece of this whole renaissance. And Sean went after him, and Ken tried very hard for several years to work out a deal. And every time Ken got a deal, Sean would back away from it and want more. And it was vital to Ken's business. But also, Ken knew that this was a bunch of horse manure. It was a bogus thing. You couldn't buy Joe's name. How could you get Joe's name? So Ken organized the Pilates people at the time. There was no central register of any of them, and he found them all, or a good part of them. He got in touch with them. He started a class action. He had to end that because it was prohibitively expensive. But then he just started his particular, well, Sean went after him personally and the business, which at that time I think was Current Concept. And he fought back and organized everybody and got lawyers and reached into his pocket for money he probably had to borrow, and fought back and persisted. And I had told him I would certainly help him, and it was a pleasure to help him. I mean, he's really an incredible leader. So and then he got Ron Fletcher back in. And he got, there were 30, I think there were 30 people available in court to testify. And he just persisted against they threw everything out. He took his deposition. They took my deposition. They took Fletcher's. They took depositions night and day. They made him come to New York and live in New York for a month. He's running a business at that time in Sacramento. I think, he was in Sacramento by then. And he just never stopped. So that it was a great pleasure helping him out. And then, I did disappear after that. And, other people started PMA. So
that brings me to actually, I think it's my last question. There was this wonderful part at the end of the book where you talk to Joe and you describe this thing that has become of his name. And you also describe his possible reaction when he'd have entered the modern studio. Can you tell us what you think Joe would have said about what's
Sure. Yeah,
happening
well,
here?
that came up from the first time I started to publicly lecture on this. All the question was, what would Joe think of it now? And I thought to myself, like I did so many times during writing the book, I try to be Joe. And I put myself in his shoes, and then I created this little scene, which I write about in the book, where he does come back. It's 40 years. The first PMA I attended, it was exactly 40 years from his death. And he comes back, and I'm his tour guide. I take him to any studio, and he walks in, and he's completely freaked out. He sees a Coraline on the wall. What the hell is that? He sees risers on the back of the reformer. He sees climbing ropes. He sees all kinds of things with the foot bar, including stuff on the outside of it. He sees the exo chair with cutouts in it. He absolutely goes nuts. And then he doesn't say anything at that point. He's absolutely hysterical. And then a class begins. And all of a sudden, there's 8 people out there on the Cadillac or whatever, and a teacher in front talking through a megaphone. He's absolutely nuts at this point. He's screaming at this point. And the only thing to do, frankly, is to give him a very heavy dose of an intravenous drug and calm him down. And after he calmed down, and after he left this environment, and he became approachable, which was a scary thing with him, I try to explain to him that this is his dream come true, not as he may have visualized it, but as it is in the real world, that there are 15, 20, 30 million people, who knows, huge, worldwide, that are doing contrology and benefiting from it. And that there's thousands of people teaching it. And that there are several businesses making the equipment. And that there are organizations promoting the name and ensuring that it meets certain standards. And the most important things to him, the medical profession has adopted it. It's everywhere. It's therapy for almost all orthopedic surgery. Athletes have adopted it. The president's wife does it. The president, one of them, probably did it. Now we've had 2 presidents' wives who do it, Biden's and Obama's, and it's all over. It's what he actually wanted, and it's a creative activity. It's a huge business everywhere that people love to be in. They happy owning studios. They love teaching it. And the world is benefiting just the way he wanted it. And maybe he would let that in. Maybe. He was ferocious. I mean, that's why it never got bigger than it did. He had to control it too much. And, you know, it's everyone else that's made it what it is. I mean, Ron Fletcher, Ramona broke the chain a little. She wouldn't admit it, but Ron was very open about changing it. The red towel, if Joe saw the red towel, he would have wrapped it around Ron's neck. I mean, he couldn't have, you know. So that's, you know, if there is any afterlife that Joe is experiencing, I hope someone can explain that to him. Maybe get a chance to read the book. I don't know. But the point is, it would be an enormous shock beyond his ability to handle it without heavy psychotic controlled drugs. But it is his dream. And that just tells you something about people's dreams. Some of them are really good. They just have trouble getting there. So, yeah.
You know, Dave has asked me to ask you to tell us about your Pilates routine, your everyday Pilates routine. And I promise that I'm not going to ask you if you practiced this morning already, but I think that
you did ask me that.
Not in front of everybody.
That's all right. Listen, I've answered the question in many ways, but the first and most important thing that I think everyone can relate to is you don't just do Pilates as a one shot during the day. You do Pilates always. So when you walk, when you sit, when you stand, when you do the dishes, when you put them away, when you take the garbage out, when you drive your car, you should, and most people who are very deeply into it, do it. They try to sit correctly. They try to hold their body correctly. They try to use movement efficiently, gracefully. That's all in there. That's all part of this whole thing. And you go back to his return to life. That's what it was all about. It wasn't about getting a workout for half an hour and perspiring and burning 263 calories and getting your heart rate up to 162. It was never about that. It's about your life. It's about how you live. So I do that. I'm conscious of it pretty much all the time. Now and then, if I slump, or, you know, okay, I straighten it out pretty quickly. So that's part of the routine. The other part is I take a class once a week on the reformer. And I have a reformer at home. I have a chair at home. I have a springboard on the wall at home. And I use them periodically during the week. You know, when I was writing the book, or now when I've been reading it for Audible, well, I take a break. I sometimes lie down on the reformer. Sometimes it's 15 minutes. Sometimes it's 45 minutes. Sometimes it's a springboard. Sometimes I just do 5 minutes on the chair, which can be, you know, tiring. And that's it. But it's always there. And it's once a week with an instructor. And yes, I could sit down or lie down on any of this equipment and do it, the routine, without an instructor. But I do it better when someone's watching me and saying, you know, point your toes or breathe in now. Or it's a constant learning process. It's a constant improvement process. It never stops. It's like learning play a musical instrument. You know, you don't take 10 lessons and think you can play a musical instrument. You take lessons till the end. Pilates is no different. This morning, I haven't done anything yet, but will I? You betcha. I'll need it.
John, it was such a pleasure. I think this final message is, wow, such an amazing message to instructors and students, and we have a lot of them here. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being here with us. I'm sorry if not all of your questions have been answered, but read the book. I'm so happy to hear that it's on Audible now. Is it on yet?
It will be. It will be. It's just being edited. I got to do some voiceover. Hadar, you could, people, if you can assemble questions, feel free to email them to me. I'm a workaholic-ish kind of terrible person, and I'm always happy to have something to do with Pilates. And now that I've thrown in here and written the book. So yeah, if people have questions, let them rip.
Okay, so people are asking what is your email, and we'll let them know your email, and you have a website that just write down johnsteele.com.
John Howard Steele.
johnhowardsteele.com.
Yeah.
So you can find John's website and correspond with him, or we can also give you that information afterwards, and we'll also send a copy of the recording so that you can watch it again. Have a great day. Yes. And here is Dave sending everyone your website address. Dave, you are such a sweetheart. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, John.
Yeah, and thank you, Hadar and Kasai. Thank you very much for putting this together. Balanced body. Rock. Yeah. And I hope you all got something out of it.
We did get a lot. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, John. יואו, אני מתה, איזה חמוד.
היי מוטי.
היי.
התחלתי בפדיקור, ישבתי עם